Welcome to Quick Speak, the English podcast. Today we're looking into something that, well, it feels incredibly relevant for so many people around the world. Maybe it feels relevant to you or perhaps someone you know. You work hard, don't you? You put in the hours. Maybe you're even juggling a couple of jobs.
Right.
But despite all that effort, it still feels like you're just managing to scrape by financially.
And that feeling, it's not just a personal struggle. What the research shows is that this is actually a really widespread, complex global thing. A paradox, really.
A paradox? How so?
Well, hard work isn't reliably leading to financial security for millions of people. That's the core of it.
Exactly. So today we're going to try and unpack why that is. We'll explore the layers, the different interconnected factors behind this.
It's definitely not simple, but understanding these different forces, well, that's the essential first step, isn't it?
It really is.
We'll touch on economics, social pressures, cultural ideas. Technology is a big one too. And even how our own thinking, our own behavior plays a part.
It sounds like putting together a puzzle. Each piece reveals a bit more.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay, let's start with what feels like the most fundamental piece of that puzzle. Wages. The money people actually earn.
Right. So there's a crucial disconnect here that we need to talk about. Globally, workers have become more productive.
Meaning they're creating more value per hour worked.
Exactly. Generating more goods, more services. But for a huge number of people, wages just haven't kept pace with that increase in productivity.
That's quite a contrast, especially in places like the US, the UK, Western Europe, these advanced economies. The average wage, the real median wage, that's after you adjust for rising prices.
Right, it's actual buying power.
Yeah, that buying power, it's barely moved for many people over, 2 decades?
That's right. Meanwhile, corporate profits, returns on capital, things like investments, property ownership, they've often seen, pretty significant gains during that same time.
So it suggests a real shift in how the economic pie is being divided up.
Fundamentally, yes. And it's not just a rich country issue either. If you look at emerging markets, Brazil, India, South Africa, for example, you saw some strong initial income growth, which was fantastic, lifted lots of people out of poverty. But then that momentum slowed down.
And the gaps widened.
And the gaps between the top earners and everyone else widened significantly. So even if you're working full-time, saving money or building any kind of wealth remains incredibly difficult for many.
Okay, so to understand this, we probably need a bit of history, right? How did it used to be?
Well, if you look back to the post-World War II era, say up to the 1970s in many developed countries, wages tended to grow much more broadly across the board.
Why was that?
It was a time of stronger labor unions, more robust social safety nets, government programs, unemployment help, healthcare support, and also progressive taxes.
Meaning wealthier people paid a higher percentage.
Correct. And those factors combined helped ensure that productivity gains were shared more widely with the workers who were generating them.
But then things started changing. Around the 80s.
Yes, around the 1980s, you start seeing several shifts happening at once. Globalization really picks up. Speed companies start looking for lower labor costs overseas.
Okay.
You get deregulation, so fewer rules on businesses and finance. Union power starts to decline in many places.
And technology.
And technology begins to increasingly favor highly skilled labor and capital itself over less skilled work. That combination really tilted the balance away from the average worker.
How did that play out differently in different places? China, for instance.
China's an interesting case. Their early industrial boom, say in the 90s and early 2000s, led to huge wage increases for urban factory workers. Massive poverty reduction, a real success story there.
But that didn't last indefinitely.
No. As their economy matured, that rapid wage growth slowed down. And then workers started facing new pressures, especially as living costs began rising faster than their wages were.
There must be a lot of debate around the causes. Is it policy or just market forces?
Oh, absolutely. There's a big debate. Is wage stagnation mostly because of specific policy choices, like weakening unions or certain trade deals?
Yeah.
Or is it just the natural evolution of free markets reacting to technology and global competition?
What are the main arguments?
Well, supporters of free trade often argue it lowers prices for consumers, which helps offset some of the wage pressure.
Okay, cheaper goods.
Right. But critics say that the constant search for the cheapest labor globally directly pushes down wages in higher-cost countries and can, reduce job quality everywhere.
But it's not the same everywhere, is it? You mentioned counterexamples.
Exactly. Look at the Scandinavian countries, Norway, Sweden, Denmark.
Yeah.
They have strong social welfare systems, active labor market policies, things like job training, support for unions bargaining collectively.
And how did they fare?
They've generally managed better wage growth and have less income inequality compared to many other advanced economies. It really suggests that policy choices do make a significant difference. It's not all inevitable.
Okay, so wages are stuck or slow growing for many. That's one huge pressure point. What's next?
Well, if wages aren't keeping up, the next critical piece is what those wages have to buy, the cost of essential things.
Right, this is where it really starts to bite, doesn't it? Things like housing, healthcare, education.
Food, energy.
Yeah.
The basics. Their prices have often been rising much faster than the general rate of inflation.
Making those stagnant wages feel even tighter.
Precisely. Take housing. In major global cities, New York, Tokyo, São Paulo, completely different contexts, housing prices have just consistently outpaced wage growth for years now.
And it's not just the mega cities, is it? Even
Yeah.
in areas considered lower cost.
Even there, the cost of living in or near urban centers where many jobs are is becoming a huge barrier for working people.
Wasn't it always the case that prices went up a bit each year? Inflation.
Yes, but historically, moderate inflation, maybe a couple of percent a year, was often matched or even beaten by wage increases, so people could maintain or improve their living standards.
What changed?
A big factor was policy after the 2008 financial crisis. Central banks slashed interest rates to almost zero to try and stimulate the economy.
Which helped recovery, presumably.
It did help, but a side effect was fueling what's called asset price inflation. The prices of things like property and stocks went way up.
Benefiting people who already owned those things.
Exactly, and making it much harder for younger people or those without assets to buy in, especially housing.
And then the pandemic hit.
Right. Then came the pandemic. You had supply chain chaos, getting goods became difficult and expensive. Plus, governments spent a lot to support economies.
All pushing prices up.
Pushing prices up sharply, yeah. Especially food and energy around 2022. And this happened while wages were still lagging behind for many, widening that gap between income and basic expenses.
Is there agreement on why that recent inflation happened? Supply issues or something else?
No, there's another heated debate there. Was it mainly temporary supply shocks from the pandemic? Or was it more fundamental, like central banks keeping interest rates too low for too long, pumping too much money into the system? Probably mix both, really.
And it varies globally too, right?
Hugely. You have countries like Turkey or Argentina that have struggled with very high inflation for years due to their own currency or government spending issues.
And others managing better.
Then you have places like Switzerland or Singapore, which have kept inflation relatively low through stable currencies and more cautious financial management.
It sounds like a really tough position for policymakers.
It is. If they raise interest rates too much to fight inflation, they risk causing a recession and job losses.
But if they keep rates low,
Then the cost crunch continues, eroding people's ability to afford necessities. It's a difficult balancing act.
and the real world impact is just people struggling.
It's profound. You hear stories, and the research confirms it, of families where multiple adults work full-time, sometimes multiple jobs each, and they still need help from family or live in overcrowded conditions far from work just to make ends meet. The costs are just outrunning the wages.
Okay, so stagnant wages, rising essential costs. What else is adding pressure?
Well, alongside those economic pressures, there's another powerful force at play. The constant pull of consumerism.
Ah, right. The pressure to buy things, to live a certain lifestyle.
Exactly. There are these prevailing ideals globally about what financial success looks like. In the West, maybe it's the classic American dream, owning a home, cars, holidays.
And elsewhere.
In places like China, as incomes rose, so did the desire for status markers, luxury items, city apartments, the latest gadgets. In Latin America, parts of Africa, Asia, you see a growing middle class eager to acquire goods and experiences that were previously out of reach.
But how do people afford this if wages are squeezed and costs are high?
Often, the answer is credit. Credit cards, installment plans, and more recently, these buy now, pay later services.
Which seem to be everywhere now.
They really are. Consumer credit itself isn't new. It expanded hugely in developed countries after WWII, but financial technology, or fintech, has made digital credit incredibly accessible, especially in emerging markets.
So you can get loans instantly on your phone.
Yeah, in places across Southeast Asia, Africa, Latin America, apps offer instant loan approvals for almost anything, from a new phone to covering a small emergency.
That sounds convenient, but potentially risky.
It democratizes access to credit, which sounds positive, but it also makes it incredibly easy to live beyond your means, to spend money you don't really have yet.
That's the trap.
That's the trap. You hear about people juggling multiple loans, a mortgage, a car loan, credit card debt, maybe a buy now, pay later plan on top, leaving absolutely no financial cushion.
And social pressure plays a role, too.
Definitely. In some cultures, there's immense pressure to spend lavishly on events like weddings or festivals, pushing families deep into debt just to meet social expectations.
So is consumerism itself the problem, or the way it's financed?
Another debate. Advocates say credit helps economies grow and gives people important choices. Critics, though, warn about predatory lending loans with hidden fees or super high interest rates and sophisticated marketing that taps into our psychology, nudging us towards spending and potentially unsustainable debt.
Are there examples of this going wrong on a larger scale?
South Africa is often mentioned. Easy credit access led to very high levels of household debt there, making families extremely vulnerable when the economy slowed down. Default rates increased.
But it's not like this everywhere. Some cultures save more.
True. Societies with traditionally strong saving cultures, think Japan, Singapore, maybe the Nordic countries, again, tend to have much lower household debt levels relative to income. This suggests that cultural norms around saving and maybe financial understanding play a really important role in resisting that constant pressure to consume and borrow.
Okay, let's dig into that debt piece more specifically. It's a huge global issue, but it looks different depending on where you are.
It really does. The type of debt varies. In the U.S., for instance, student loans are a massive burden, particularly for younger generations. We're talking about, what, $1.7 trillion in total?
Wow. And mortgages.
Mortgages, home loans are usually the biggest single debt for families everywhere they're common. And as we said, high property prices mean those loans are getting bigger.
Who does Europe compare?
Mortgages dominate there too. But some countries like Germany or the Netherlands have historically had stricter underwriting standards.
That's the checks banks do before lending.
Yes, checking your ability to repay. So their households tend to have lower debt compared to their income than, say, the US or UK.
And in emerging markets.
Traditionally, debt there was often more unsecured consumer credit cards, personal loans not tied to an asset like a house and car loans. But mortgage markets are growing very quickly now in places like China, India, and across Latin America.
Has it always been this way with formal loans?
Not necessarily. Large-scale mortgage lending really grew in the US and UK after World War II, often encouraged by government policies for home ownership. In many other parts of the world, particularly the Middle East or North Africa, informal finance, borrowing from family or community savings groups was, and sometimes still is, much more common for big purchases like property.
But globalization changed that.
Yes, starting in the 90s and 2000s, international banks brought more standardized loan products like mortgages to emerging markets. Sometimes this happened faster than local regulations could adapt to protect borrowers properly.
And the 2008 crisis showed the risks.
Absolutely. It was a stark reminder of how interconnected everything is. Bad loans in one market, the U.S. subprime mortgage market, triggered a global financial crisis.
Are there similar risks today?
There are concerns. In some rapidly growing economies, lending standards for mortgages might be getting a bit looser again, raising worries about potential property bubbles.
And what about that unsecured credit you mentioned, the non-mortgage debt?
That has just exploded, largely driven by smartphones and digital lending platforms, especially in Southeast Asia and parts of Africa.
Instant approvals, but high costs.
Often, yes. You can get money almost instantly via an app, but the interest rates can be incredibly high, sometimes 20%, 30%, or even more per year. It's easy to get tracked.
Are regulators keeping up?
It's a huge challenge. Financial regulators globally are struggling to keep pace with the speed of fintech innovation. This can leave gaps where predatory practices emerge, harming vulnerable borrowers.
You mentioned student debt earlier, especially in places like the US, UK, Australia, Canada.
Yes, those countries have large government-backed student loan programs. They provide access to education for many, which is good. But the repayment burden is significant, even if it's often linked to how much you earn later.
How is that different from developing countries?
Well, in many developing nations, higher education can be very expensive and is often self-funded, or it's simply out of reach for poorer families. So the issue there isn't so much student debt, it's often a lack of student access in the first place, which of course also limits financial mobility down the line.
Okay, with all this complex debt and financial products swirling around, it raises a big question. Do people actually understand how to manage it all? What about financial literacy?
That's a really important point. And global data suggests, well, there are pretty significant gaps in basic financial knowledge.
Really? Like what?
Well, the OECD, an international organization, did a study PISIZE in 2022 looking at 15-year-olds. They found globally only about a quarter demonstrated a high level of financial know-how.
Only a quarter.
Yeah. And the research indicates that formal personal finance education is often lacking in school systems, especially in low and middle-income countries. It leaves young people entering adulthood without the basic tools to handle budgeting, debt, savings, or investing.
Hasn't there been a push to teach this stuff in schools?
Slowly, yes.
Yeah.
It started entering curricula in some advanced economies, maybe late 20th century, becoming mandatory in a few places by the 2000s. More recently, you've seen national campaigns to boost financial understanding in places like Singapore and Hong Kong.
And outside of schools?
You have NGOs and microfinance groups offering workshops, maybe in parts of Africa, but the reach is often limited. And while there are tons of personal finance apps now,
Yeah, loads of apps.
they often focus on the what, tracking spending, maybe investing, but not always the why or the how, especially addressing those behavioral biases we'll talk about later, the psychological reasons we sometimes make poor financial choices.
So whose job is it then? Schools? Banks? Parents?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's a really heated debate. Who is ultimately responsible for financial education?
Does it make a difference if it's taught formally?
Well, there seems to be a correlation. Countries like Finland and the Netherlands, which have integrated comprehensive financial education into their schools, tend to show lower debt levels and higher savings rates among young people,
Compared to way it's optional.
compared to places, say, like Italy or Mexico, where it's often optional or less emphasized. And in those places, you might see higher rates of households without insurance, lower savings, maybe more reliance on informal, high-cost lending.
What about the argument that younger people, digital natives, learn everything online anyway? Do they need formal classes?
That's another point of contention. Are online tools and apps enough? Or do people need structured learning to really grasp core concepts like compound interest, risk, or just how to read the fine print on a loan agreement? Just having access to information doesn't automatically mean understanding or applying it effectively.
Okay, let's shift focus now to the jobs themselves. You mentioned earlier that the nature of work is changing. How does that fit into this picture of working hard but struggling?
It's a major factor. We're seeing a global trend away from the traditional model of a full-time permanent job with benefits and long-term security,
Towards what?
towards more precarious forms of work. Part-time jobs, often involuntary. Contracts with no guaranteed hours, sometimes called zero-hour contracts. And a big rise in freelance or gig work, often managed through online platforms like Upwork, Fiverr, and others. This is especially noticeable in advanced economies since around the 2010s.
And the gig economy is big in developing countries too, right?
Yeah, huge. Millions of people in places like India, the Philippines, Nigeria earn their income through ride-hailing apps, food delivery services, or doing small online microtasks for clients often located overseas.
What's the trade-off there? Flexibility versus...
Exactly. These roles can offer flexibility, maybe autonomy, or access to a global pool of clients, which sounds appealing. But the downside is often a lack of job security, no benefits like healthcare or retirement savings, and highly unpredictable income. That makes financial planning almost impossible.
How does this compare to the past?
Well, if you think back to the mid-20th century, particularly in industrialized countries, stable, full-time factory jobs were much more common, often with union protection providing decent wages and benefits.
Then came outsourcing.
Then came outsourcing and offshoring in the 90s and 2000s. Companies moved production, supply chains became fragmented. This created new service jobs, sure, but it eroded that stable manufacturing base in many places.
And online platforms accelerated this.
Yes, they enabled what's sometimes called digital labor arbitrage, meaning someone in, say, Eastern Europe with lower living costs can offer graphic design services online to a client in the US for a much lower rate than a local designer. It connects talent globally, which can be good, but it also creates intense global competition for certain types of digital work, relying on a large supply of available workers, which can drive down wages for more routine tasks.
And these platforms are managed by algorithms.
Increasingly, yes. These complex computer programs dictate workflows, assign tasks, set pay rates, offer bonuses, everything. This algorithmic management, as it's called, can significantly reduce a worker's bargaining power and make their income feel very arbitrary and outside their control.
Which leads to legal questions about whether these workers are employees or contractors.
Precisely. It's a huge legal and ethical debate happening worldwide. Are gig workers employees who deserve minimum wage, overtime, benefits? Or are they independent contractors responsible for all their own costs and security?
How are different places tackling this?
You see varied responses. The UK courts ruled some ride-hailing drivers were workers, giving them certain rights like minimum wage and holiday pay. But in California, voters passed Proposition 22, which specifically classified them as contractors, limiting those benefits.
And in developing countries?
Many countries like Argentina, India, several African nations are grappling with how to update their labor laws and social protection systems for this new reality. But designing effective policies and actually implementing them is really challenging and often slow.
So it's this constant tension, innovation, flexibility on one side,
Versus security, fair wages, and avoiding exploitation on the other. The reality for many is juggling multiple precarious gigs, working incredibly hard, but still finding it almost impossible to build a stable financial foundation.
Beyond the external factors like jobs and costs, what about our own minds? Does our psychology play a role in making it harder to get ahead financially?
It definitely does. There's a well-documented human tendency, often called hyperbolic discounting or present bias.
Meaning we prefer things now rather than later.
Essentially, yes. We're strongly wired to value immediate rewards much more highly than future benefits, even if the future benefit is objectively larger or better.
How does that show up financially?
It manifests as impulsive spending, not saving enough for long-term goals like retirement, or just putting off important but maybe unpleasant financial tasks like planning or budgeting. And this isn't specific to one culture. You see examples everywhere. People choosing a new phone today over adding to an emergency fund for tomorrow.
Is there science behind this?
Yes, brain imaging studies actually show that immediate rewards activate the brain's pleasure and reward centers much more strongly than thinking about delayed rewards. It seems to be a pretty fundamental part of our wiring.
But haven't societies always had ways to deal with this?
That's an interesting point. Historically, many cultures developed community-based saving mechanisms. Think of Ruth Cass's rotating savings and credit associations common in Africa, or chit funds in India, or even early credit unions.
How did they help?
They often added a strong element of social pressure and mutual accountability. You committed to saving a certain amount regularly within the group. Letting the group down had social consequences, which helped individuals overcome that personal bias toward immediate spending.
And that's less common now.
With the rise of individual banking, and maybe a more consumerist culture, those traditional communal saving structures have weakened in many places. So a young person today might face debt and job insecurity without that kind of social scaffolding supporting financial discipline.
And modern life makes it harder.
You could argue it does. We're constantly bombarded with digital marketing flash sales, targeted ads, the sheer ease of buy now, pay later. Even some finance apps use gamification, which can sometimes encourage more activity rather than thoughtful planning. It feels like a constant battle between our impulsive desires and the need for long-term prudence.
Are there ways to counteract this bias? People talk about nudges.
Yes, behavioral economists are very interested in designing nudges. These are small changes to the way choices are presented or to the environment that gently steer people towards better decisions without forcing them.
Like what?
A classic example is automatic enrollment in retirement savings plans, like in the UK. When people are automatically signed up but have the choice to opt out, participation rates skyrocket compared to when they have to actively opt in.
Making the default option the better long-term choice.
Exactly. Or some fintech apps use roundup features, automatically saving the spare change from your purchases. Small amounts, but it adds up, and it requires no active effort.
Are there criticisms of nudging?
Sure. Some argue it could be paternalistic who decides what the better choice is. And a bigger criticism is whether nudges are really enough. If the fundamental problems like low wages, high housing costs, or job insecurity aren't addressed. Can you nudge someone out of poverty if their income simply isn't sufficient?
So helpful, but maybe not the whole solution.
Likely part of the solution, but not a magic bullet. The cutting edge now is exploring how to combine technology with more personalized coaching, AI-driven advice, or making the act of saving itself more engaging and rewarding.
Okay, beyond individual psychology, what about broader cultural values? Do ideas about work ethic contribute to this paradox?
They definitely play a role. Pretty much every culture around the world values hard work as a virtue.
You see that everywhere.
Absolutely. In East Asia, for example, Confucian traditions in places like China, South Korea, Japan emphasize diligence, long hours, and intense focus on education as pathways to success.
Sometimes to an extreme.
Sometimes, yes. You hear about phenomena like karushi, literally death from overwork in Japan, or the incredibly long working hours often expected in South Korea. In South Asia, too, there's often huge cultural pressure to pursue high-status degrees, like medicine or engineering, with the expectation of guaranteed prosperity.
Which doesn't always happen.
Right. The competition is fierce and sometimes leads to underemployment or jobs that don't deliver the expected financial rewards, despite years of intense effort and study.
And in Western cultures.
You have the historical influence of the Protestant work ethic, valuing hard work and self-reliance. More recently, there's the rise of hustle culture, especially online, which glorifies working constantly, often on multiple projects or side gigs.
But does just working longer hours guarantee success?
Often, no. It can be an illusion. Long hours don't automatically lead to upward mobility, and they frequently lead to burnout and health problems.
Are there cultures that approach this differently?
Yes, the Nordic countries are often highlighted again here. They tend to place a stronger cultural emphasis on work-life balance. They experiment with things like 4-day work weeks, have generous parental leave policies, and view rest and recovery as essential for productivity, not distractions from it.
That's a different perspective.
It is. Meanwhile, social media probably amplifies the pressure everywhere.
Yeah.
Constantly showing curated images of success, making people feel inadequate if they aren't achieving that level, even if they are working incredibly hard.
It raises questions about whether societies need to rethink these values.
Exactly. Should we continue to equate endless effort with virtue if it's not leading to well-being or security for so many?
Is there evidence that overwork is actually counterproductive?
Yes. Research from organizations like the World Health Organization and the International Labor Organization links excessively long working hours to reduce long-term productivity, more workplace accidents, and serious health issues like stroke and heart disease. Some European companies experimenting with shorter work weeks report increased productivity.
But in places with high unemployment, the priority must be different.
That's the harsh reality. In regions with high unemployment, say parts of India or Nigeria, the main focus is often just securing any job and working as many hours as possible, even in low-paying or exploitative conditions, because the alternative might be no income at all. The cultural pressure to work hard meets dire economic necessity.
So this gap between the cultural ideal of hard work paying off and the reality for many
is another powerful thread running through this whole paradox of working hard but staying broke.
Governments must play a huge role in all this through their policies.
Absolutely critical. Government choices fundamentally shape the environment in which people work and live.
What are the different approaches we see?
Well, you have distinct models. We mentioned the Scandinavian model, countries like Norway, Sweden, Denmark. They generally have higher taxes, but use that revenue to fund generous social safety nets.
Like healthcare, childcare.
Comprehensive healthcare, heavily subsidized childcare, strong unemployment benefits, funding for retraining if you lose your job. These act as a significant cushion for families, softening the blow of wage stagnation or job loss.
And the alternative?
Contrast that with, say, the U.S. model or many systems in Eastern Europe. Generally, lower taxes, but also much more limited social supports. This leaves individuals and families far more exposed to market fluctuations, stagnant wages, or unexpected costs like medical bills.
What about emerging markets? Do they have safety nets?
It varies enormously. Some have implemented large-scale successful programs. Brazil's Bolsa Familia cash transfer program, for example, or social grants in South Africa have lifted millions out of extreme poverty.
But there are debates about those too.
Yes, ongoing debates about whether they might discourage work in the long run or whether they're effectively targeted to reach the very poorest people.
And what about the informal economy, people working outside formal systems?
That's a massive challenge, especially in Southeast Asia, Indonesia, the Philippines, Vietnam, and much of Africa. Think of street vendors, day laborers, workers in small, unregistered workshops.
They work hard, presumably.
Incredibly hard, often in difficult conditions, but they typically lack any formal protections. No pensions, no health insurance, no regulated working hours or safety standards. For these millions, an illness or an economic downturn isn't just a setback, it can be a complete financial catastrophe. Hard work offers no security.
Tax policy must be a big lever governments have.
Huge and hotly debated. Should taxes be more progressive, asking more from the highest earners or wealth? Countries like France and Spain have experimented with wealth taxes, but face challenges with people moving assets or finding loopholes.
What about flat taxes?
Some places, like Portugal or Italy, have discussed or implemented flat taxes. Everyone pays the same rate, arguing it stimulates investment. But the evidence for that is often weak, and it usually means less revenue for public services that support working families.
Is universal basic income, UBI, a serious discussion?
It's being discussed and trialed more seriously. Pilot projects in Finland, Kenya, India, parts of North America are exploring whether providing a basic, regular cash payment to everyone could offer a safety net in an age of precarious work and potential automation.
What are the arguments against UBI?
Major concerns are about the cost, how do you finance it without crippling taxes elsewhere, and potential impacts on inflation or the incentive to work. It's still very much in the experimental phase.
So the bottom line is government choices matter a lot.
Absolutely. The wide variation in outcomes across countries with similar economic pressures shows that the working but broke situation isn't inevitable. It's significantly shaped, mitigated, or worsened by political and policy choices.
Okay, one last major factor we need to touch on is technology, especially automation and AI. How is that reshaping things?
Technology is a massive accelerator and transformer in this equation. Automation and artificial intelligence are increasingly capable of performing tasks previously done by humans.
Both physical and mental tasks.
Yes, robots are common in manufacturing, doing assembly line work in places like Germany, Japan, South Korea. But AI is also taking over service tasks, handling customer inquiries via chatbots, doing basic research or data analysis, even assisting with medical diagnostics.
Which jobs are most at risk?
Primarily jobs involving routine, predictable tasks, whether manual or cognitive. This poses a direct threat to many jobs currently prevalent in manufacturing hubs like Mexico, Vietnam, or Thailand. And as we discussed, platform algorithms are already impacting wages in gig economy roles worldwide.
Haven't previous technological revolutions also displaced jobs but created new ones?
They have. That's the historical pattern. The difference this time might be the speed and the breadth of the change. AI has the potential to impact a much wider range of jobs, including white-collar roles, faster than previous technologies did.
And the new jobs being created.
The new jobs, like AI trainers, data scientists, drone operators, prompt engineers, often require highly specialized skills that many workers displaced from older industries simply don't have and may find difficult to acquire.
Retraining is difficult.
It's a huge hurdle. Even in wealthy countries, retraining programs can be costly, time-consuming, and geographically inaccessible for many. In developing countries, public retraining infrastructure is often severely underfunded, offering few realistic alternatives for workers whose industries are declining.
So will new jobs appear fast enough? Or is there a fundamental mismatch?
That's the multi-trillion-dollar question, really. Will technological advancement create enough new, well-paying jobs to offset the losses? Or are we heading towards a future with a structural mismatch, where a significant portion of the workforce struggles to find work that provides a decent living? The jury's still out.
What are the proposed solutions?
There's a lot of talk about reskilling revolutions. Massive efforts involving governments, businesses, and educational institutions working together to train people for the skills of the future. Focus is often on digital literacy, critical thinking, creativity, social and emotional skills, things machines are currently less good at.
But can we retrain everyone at scale?
That's the criticism. Can these efforts realistically keep pace with technological change? Will they reach people in rural areas or those already struggling? It's a monumental task.
Is the alternative shifting focus to uniquely human skills?
That's another perspective. Maybe the future of human work lies more in roles that require empathy, complex problem-solving, creativity, and interpersonal interaction areas where AI currently falls short. Caring professions, education, creative arts, complex strategic thinking.
But for people stuck now, that future feels far away.
And that's how technology feeds back into the paradox. Without strong safety nets or some form of guaranteed income support during transitions, many people remain trapped. They can't afford the time off work or the cost of retraining for a future job, while their current precarious work earns too little to save or invest. They're working hard just to survive today, with little capacity to prepare for tomorrow.
Okay, let's try and bring all these threads together. It's a lot to take in.
It is.
We've talked about wages not keeping pace with productivity, while the cost of absolute essentials, housing, healthcare, education has soared. We looked at the heavy burden of debt, whether it's student loans, mortgages, or high-interest consumer credit, and the constant pressure from consumer culture to spend.
Right. Amplified by easy credit access.
Then there are the gaps in financial literacy, making it hard to navigate this complex world. And the big shift in the nature of work itself towards less secure, more precarious jobs, the gig economy.
Don't forget the internal factors, our own behavioral biases, like preferring rewards now over later, making saving difficult.
And the cultural pressures valuing hard work intensely, sometimes to the point of burnout, even when it doesn't lead to financial security.
Plus, the crucial role of government policy shaping taxes, safety nets, regulations, which can either help cushion these blows or leave people more exposed.
And finally, the accelerating force of technology, automation, and AI, which is reshaping the labor market in profound ways.
So when you put all those pieces together, wages, costs, debt, consumerism, literacy, job security, behavior, culture, policy, technology, you start to see why this phenomenon of working hard but staying broke isn't just a personal issue.
It's systemic.
It's a complex, interconnected global phenomenon with really deep roots. It's not about individual failure.
So the key takeaway here is that it's multi-layered. You can't just point to one single cause.
Exactly. Understanding how these different forces interact is absolutely crucial. Policy choices matter hugely. Cultural norms matter. Market forces matter. Our own understanding and behavior matter. They all weave together.
It leaves us with a big question, doesn't it? Given how global these challenges are and how fast technology is moving, what kind of fundamental shifts might be needed, not just in how we manage our own finances, perhaps, but in our societal structures, our policies, maybe even our values? How do we make sure that hard work can actually lead to real financial security in the future?
That's the question to ponder. What stands out most to you as you listen to this? How do you see these pieces fitting together in your own community or in the world you observe?
Definitely a lot to think about. Thank you for breaking that down for us.
You're welcome. It's a vital conversation to have.
And for all of you listening, we hope this discussion was helpful for understanding this complex topic and perhaps for your English learning too. Please remember to visit our website, which you can find linked in the description. There you'll find more learning materials related to today's discussion, including key vocabulary explanations and exercises to help you practice.
That can be really useful.
We hope so. And don't forget to subscribe to Quick Speak so you don't miss our future discussions. Thanks for tuning in.